Hello everyone out there, my name is Jamie Strashin. We're here on the 10th floor at CBC for this Facebook Live. All week we've been talking about sexual abuse in amateur sport. CBC News and Sports has done a lengthy investigation kind of looking at the last 20 years in this country, what's going on not on the professional level, not at the elite level, but down where most of the children in this country are participating at the youth, club, local level. And what we found was in the last 20 years, we had more than 340 coaches who were charged with a sexual offense against a minor. Of those, 222 convictions involving more than 600 victims. It's not a hockey problem, it's not a baseball problem. It was a problem that we found across 36 different sports. And I have to say, like in my career, I've never had the reaction to a story like this. It's been overwhelming, and it's hopefully the beginning of a conversation, including the one that we're going to have here. And I just want to introduce our great panel. Thank you all for making the trip here to Toronto from just to my right here from Hockey Canada, Todd Jackson. Todd, thanks for coming. From Canada Basketball, Don Smyth. Don, pleasure. Lorraine Lafreniere, who is with the Coaching Association of Canada. Lorraine has been a key help to us along what's been a long journey, and really happy to have Karyn Kennedy with Boost Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Been doing this a long time, and really appreciate you having your perspective. And please, obviously this is driven by your questions. We've heard from so many of you via email and message over the last few days. As I said, the response has been overwhelming. Lots of questions from parents and administrators. Hope to see some of those reflected in here. And let's dive right into it. Angela Gray comments on Facebook. She said, like a lot of people, their takeaway from this was, they were scared. Their kids are in sport X, and they were scared. Should people have fear when they drop their child off, in your case, Todd, at the arena?
I think that what they need to have is they need to have awareness. And I think what's so important is for parents to be aware of what's happening with teams, be aware of schedules, be aware of everything around the environment that their young person is in. And if they can do that, then I think that helps to dissipate some of that fear. I really do. And I think sport is fantastic, and kids need to be involved, but be involved as well as a parent. I think that's so important.
Don, what have you heard from people since this came out?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern, but I think just to echo what Todd's saying is that it gives an opportunity for awareness, and it empowers the parents as the consumer of youth sport to ask some really serious questions of their clubs, to see if they're actual members of the provincial and national sporting organizations and what kind of processes have been put in place, and if they're following the ones from the provincial and national associations to make sure it is a safe environment for their kids. So I think with fear and the knowledge that we're all really willing to share and to put out, parents could really become wonderful advocates in this and get active in helping us save the sport.
And Lorraine, you've talked a lot about parents having to be, very involved. How involved should parents be?
Well, I actually think, Jamie, what parents need to focus on is right at the registration time with their clubs or their sport organizations. And that's when you have the opportunity, before you register your child, to ask the right questions. Check out the website, see if there's an abuse policy, see if there's the rule of two, see the requirements around training and screening. And that really is a shift that we hope is as a result of this week, where parents think differently about the questions they ask at the clubhouse. Not so much about equipment anymore, but the first questions should be about safety off the field of play.
And Karyn, to that question, to Angela's question about fear, a lot of parents we've heard from this week, they'll be like, well, I want to be involved, but I don't want to be too involved. How should parents kind of walk that line, if you will?
Right. Well, actually, it starts long before the registration table, I would suggest. It happens in the home, and it happens as parents begin to teach their children about communication and respect and asking for help and developing the kind of relationship with your child where they feel they can come to you with any kind of problem, not waiting until something happens, but beginning to educate them, listening to them, believing them, and letting them know that that's the response that they'll get when they come to you, regardless of what they're concerned about.
A lot of people, they see these numbers and they're like, how does this happen? Robert Planek on Facebook asking, how do coaches end up in situations, where you get to the point of the abuse? I mean, I'll give that to you, Don. What are some rules that Basketball Canada is trying to get into its club to kind of mitigate those situations?
Yeah, I mean, we've got several rules. I think the first is making sure that your club is actually a member of the PSO and SSOs.
What does that mean? Why is that important?
Well, it's important so that we can advocate for you, and so that if there is a problem with your coach, that we can get up and do something about it. And so we're very committed to making sure our members are safe. But if your club's not a member, if your child's not a member of the sport, it makes it a lot more difficult for us to do that for you. And so I think first and foremost, in order for us we create all these policies and we have them, but to make sure that we can act on them, it's really important that they are actually a member, and making sure that we can apply those policies for you.
Just a question. All week we've kind of been talking about this kind of disconnect. I mean, you guys have some great stuff happening at the top, but getting that down, to the basketball club in Saskatoon or Halifax or Toronto. How far away from that are you? And what do you need to make that happen?
Yeah, I think that's our ultimate goal. I think a little bit more alignment between the NSO and the PTSO to making sure that some of those goals are aligned and that we're working towards that same end goal. I mean, we're currently working on a licensing system that I think will really close that communication between the NSO and the end member, to really help communicate directly to the coaches, to the athletes, to the parents, to the volunteers, anyone who's around the youth that are playing in the sport.
So that'd be like a list of good coaches.
It would be any coach that's on there and the ability to suspend one that aligns with some of the legalities that are going on. And so it would be, that a coach would be able to produce that license, and if it was so suspended by the National Federation, whatever club or referee that went to go referee the game would see that it's a suspended license. They wouldn't allow to be in that venue and working with the kids. So, that's our ultimate goal, to make sure that, at every checkpoint possible, that there's a way to make sure that it's the safe coaches that are there, the ones that have been trained, that have taken the training, that have the background checks, and have all those policies in play, to make sure that those are the ones that are in the competitive and the practice environments.
Just a question for you, Karyn, from John Louis via YouTube. Who are these people? I mean, who are these people, and how are they getting into these positions?
It's a great question, and this goes far beyond sport. I know we're talking about sport today, but sexual abuse of children is about power and it's about access. And any opportunity to have access to children is potentially a risk, because that's where people who want to commit this kind of behavior are attracted. So I think that the rules are important, the policies, the procedures, the education, the training, all of that, but we really need to go beyond that and teach our kids to trust their feelings, teach adults to trust their feelings. The rule of two, while I agree, Larry Nassar abused gymnasts with their mothers in the room. So we really need to make sure our kids understand that when they feel uncomfortable about something, and it could be as simple as a back rub, they should tell someone who is going to listen to them and take action to protect them.
Todd, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and I think I go back a little bit to integrating to grassroots, and obviously in the late 1990s we had disclosures that came to the surface, and it was tragic. It was tragic, and we really felt we needed to move ahead. Our volunteers grabbed onto a movement, and the Speak Out Committee came together and said we need to do certain things. Sheldon Kennedy was a big part of that. We brought in networking and worked with organizations such as Kids Help Phone and the Red Cross, and I think that it's taken us a long period of time to be able to integrate into the grassroots with education, and I call them the pillars of safety with respect to this topic. And you know, we talk about education, we talk about policy building, we talk about screening, we talk about good networking, all the things that are important with getting information down to the grassroots. And it takes time and it takes patience, but to start it now is a good thing. Don't wait till it's perfect, get it in place and start working down towards the grassroots.
A lot of the pieces in this, the one thing that there seems to be some uniformity around across the local club levels is there seems most have some form of background check in place at a base level. And John Keel Garrick on Facebook says, you know, every minor sports association that he volunteered with, or she, required background checks and 2 adults around every vulnerable minor. Kind of how, if parents see background checks, they're like, you know, everything seems good here. Lorraine, do background checks, should they assuage parents?
They are one set in a toolkit. And so the toolkit needs to have more things than just a screening, a background check, because everybody's convicted a first time. Everybody is charged a first time. And so the policies, the abuse policies, I can't stress the rule of 2 enough. Our partnership with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, that is the recommendation, is 2 adults present at all times. And the other part is education. And so the one thing I'll add to this conversation is the need to focus on what the profession of coaching is as a job function. So the job function of rubbing somebody's back is not in the job function for professional coaches. And it doesn't matter if you're a volunteer or you're paid. The understanding the job description of the coach, having the conversation with your children about what to expect, having that conversation in the clubhouse is really what makes all the difference. So in isolation, screening is not a tool that prevents it globally. It is one part of a toolkit.
Don, where do you kind of see screening fit into all of this?
I agree. I think it's a first barrier. So I think it's like, you know, those that are convicted, that we make sure that they're not coming into the sport. And so, you know, I think most people assume that background checks are happening, but I think it's something you need to check to make sure that it's occurring and how frequent it occurs. So to make sure that, you know, it was done 10 years ago and they submitted that, or is it something that's current? So I think those 2 things are really important. And just building on what Lorraine's saying around education, I think that's fundamentally really important. The background check will do the preliminary, but making sure education gets into everybody around. And I think CAC's built a wonderful module in their coaching education around making ethical decisions, which empowers those around the incident to be able to make a decision on what's ethical or what's legal and how to act on it. And I think for parents, going back to your previous question, parents asking, is that a component of our coaches? Do our coaches and the administrators and those around our youth, do they have those skill sets based on the education that's delivered?
And I, you know, just to kind of play off that a little bit, and, you know, for you, you know, Karyn, first off, who's providing that education and what's the best education, especially for younger athletes around this? I mean, talking to them about this.
Yeah, so there's different programs that exist across the country. Boost provides prevention programs to children in elementary school, all the way up to grade 8. There are resources that are available, but I think it really starts with parents in the home. All adults are responsible for protecting children. All adults are responsible for reporting suspicions of abuse, and I think, you know, people don't even know that. So that's another place where education needs to be offered, is helping people to understand what are the signs of abuse, what are the grooming practices that are of concern, and, you know, when do you make that call to report. So there is education available. I think it's just not being provided in any kind of a universal way.
And that's what we've discovered, is that
Yes.
there's a lack of universal education on this. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, reporting and accountability. Laura McDonald on Facebook says, as a former elite swimmer, swim coach, and now a hockey mom, I see all sides of the issue. Hockey Canada wants 2 adults in the locker room at all times. make this happen in all sports. It covers the coaches, it covers the hearsay. All volunteers need to have a criminal background check. We also need to see accountability from the organizations. If an issue is raised, do not dismiss it, address it ASAP. Thank you, Laura. And we know at the national level there's a huge debate as to what we're going to do with complaints. Who's going to handle them? Are they going to be handled by the NSO? Are they going to be kicked out to some external agency? At the local level, where the politics can be just as intense, to Laura's point, what needs to be in place, Todd, at the local hockey level to handle both parent and player complaints?
I think that at the local level, it becomes very, very challenging with respect to investigation, with respect to reporting of complaints. I think we have to build as many tools as we can to provide to the minor hockey or to the minor sport, if you will, so they can equip themselves to deal with those kinds of complaints. Policies need to be very clear and very concise as to steps that you can take, especially in this situation. And for example, the Hockey Canada policy very, very, very specifically says that if there is a thought of abuse that is occurring, that is reported to the authorities. And that becomes a very, very clear direction. So there needs to be clear direction, there needs to be tools out there needs to be templates to allow the minor associations or the members or whatever level it may be to appropriately put steps in place to deal with complaints.
Like, would it be possible, Don, for all complaints from affiliated clubs with basketball to kind of flow through you guys?
Yeah, I think that's where we stand at this moment, is to first of all just get in contact with someone. So if you're not sure who, the first thing is just to reach out, start connecting with, whether it's the provincial and territorial organizations, which we have wonderful relationships with, and I'm sure, within the 24 hours they'll connect with us, and from there, once we gather the details, and we can help figure out if it is a legal matter, if it's an ethical piece, or where and what policy we can apply in order to help out the youth, the parent, the club, and as members, that's their right. That's what we provide for them. So I think, get in contact with someone and not necessarily get stuck on who's the right one, but just to get into action.
Lorraine, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to get the resources out as much as possible. We have a partnership with Kids Help Phone, so that's for youth. We have a partnership with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. They have online and a phone line that you can call. The Children's Aid is an opportunity if you suspect abuse in a family environment and you see it come into the clubhouse. The clubhouse can be an option. The police station if it's imminent danger. And so Dawn, you're so right on. It's just about taking that first step and reaching out. It's not about the burden of proving it, it's about the suspicion and reporting it to help prevent future abuse.
Question directly for you, Karyn, from Facebook. John Kill asks, are some of the kids being targeted because they come from families that are struggling, more vulnerable? Is there a character sketch of the victim here?
Not necessarily. All children can be vulnerable, but there are sometimes situations where children are more receptive to having somebody who pays a lot of attention to them because there is something in their life that's going on. But really, I would say all kids are vulnerable. The other thing I just wanted to say in response to my colleagues is the law is really clear in Canada. Any suspicion of child abuse must be reported, and it must be reported to a child protection agency, and those exist across our country. There are people that have the expertise to do those kinds of investigations. They can consult. It gets really messy sometimes when there's a number of people who have been involved in hearing the concern, hearing the information. And so I would just say we really need to remember, and that needs to be part of education for parents, for coaches, for everybody, is the report has to be made to a child protection agency.
The one thing I've kind of struggled in doing these stories all week, I've 3 young kids, curious what dad's been up to. I mean, how does that conversation, look like with young children? Kind of, you've signed them up for their first organized activity. How does that conversation play out?
Well, you start to talk to them when they're young. You talk to them about their bodies, their right to privacy, their right to consent, that their bodies belong to them and no one else, and nobody can touch them in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable, and there should never be secrets around touching. That any secret should be something that they tell you as their dad, or they tell some other adult in their life that they trust. But you start that conversation when they're young and you keep talking about it. It's not one conversation. Kids learn by repetition, so you have to keep that dialogue going.
It's an interesting kind of point here from Judy Martin on Facebook. She's saying, should we end all organized activities, for children? Taking it to an extreme, but to kind of riff off of that a little bit, I think that, the competitive nature of sports now, it's so competitive, beyond the house league level. I think it really emboldens coaches, and it really, constrains parents. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit, Todd?
I think sport has so many benefits, and we look at kids being involved with sport and their ability to make friends and their ability to be involved in organized activity. It goes on and on. Skill development, learning life skills.
Yeah.
It just really goes on and on. I think we need to continue to build the safe platform. And we need to take what we've got, because there is stuff out there, there's great stuff out there that some organizations are doing. We need to take the stuff that's being done, because you know what? All the sports have to learn, including us. And we've got things in place, and we want to learn more. We want to continue to build that safe environment, because we want kids in sport. It's so important.
You made that point about Larry Nassar. That parents will concede a lot of things with that. I think it was one of your terms, Lorraine, the gold dust coach. I mean, you have to separate the two things, on-field performance versus the behavior of a coach.
Yes, and we have a long way to go to help our parents understand that more clearly, and that is the opportunity and the challenge that we face, Jamie, because we need parents to understand it's not winning at all costs, and they do need to understand that there are barriers to someone maybe being a technical coach but having questionable behavior. It shouldn't exempt them from having a high ethical standard of behavior. I just want to add one thing, if I could. I really find it's important for parents to take a look at the rules of the clubhouse and walk through them with their children at the appropriate language level. What should they expect at the clubhouse? What are those rules? And walk through and say, this is what the season should look like. And in fact, the really great clubs will gather all the parents and the participants and have that conversation up front with all of them in the room. Parents have the power to change our sports system, and the more they ask for these opportunities and this discussion to happen, the more the sports system will respond and change.
What should that conversation look like at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think it's, like Lorraine said, pulling them all together, and all the national sporting organizations have those tools available. So whether it's the long-term athlete development that's sport specific for that sport, which really details the things that Lorraine was talking about, how many competition to practice ratio, should your child be participating in at their given age? What's the social emotional development that should be happening within that sport to be able to get the benefits that Todd was talking about within that sport itself? So, that conversation and those components should be in, that talk. And a lot of the national sporting organizations, which are given to the provincial ones as well, is this sort of club excellence idea, and outlines what would an excellent club really look like? What are those components? And using that to filter that conversation, to ask those questions to your club. Do you have this component? Do you have that component? What about this around organization? What about this about safety? Does it exist in my club? Yeah. Or what are we doing to try and create that? Or as a parent, is that something I can initiate within? And I think that's what Lorraine's saying. Is just, that's what parents have the ability and the power to do within the local level, is taking these resources that have been developed by all our sports and actually empowering them in their local area and making this a really great environment for their kids.
Karyn, what are some questions parents should be asking?
They should be asking what the reporting policies are. They should be asking what training is provided. They should be asking questions about some of the things that have already been touched on. Who's in the change room, the locker room, all of those kinds of things. They should really have a really clear understanding of what their children are going to be doing, who they're going to be doing it with, and what the supervision is going to be like.
Dan Ralph on Facebook's asking, should these issues around sexual abuse education be controlled by the employers, the clubs, and not the sports associations? His point is that they could educate the coaches, that they should do all this kind of themselves, that it should be left to the local clubs. Is that a system?
I think it takes all to be involved. We cannot put this in silos. It has to be everyone involved with the game, the parents, the coaches, the administrators. It has to be all levels. And the one thing I think that we've learned is you also need the outside experts. You need the networking to outside experts to help you come in. So you can see where I'm going here, that it's an overall platform that needs to be built, and that safety net, if you will, in order to make it effective.
When this report came out, given you alluded to it before, you didn't say his name, but we kind of used that Graham James case as like that seminal case in Canada where things were supposed to be different. Why do you think that we're still seeing so many cases? What's the broken part of the system?
I don't know that there's a broken part. I think what it is that 20 years ago when that came out, there was a momentum, and that momentum built. And there was programming, and there was policy building, and there was all the things that we needed to put in place. I think, though, that as with anything, momentum slows down as the years come, and over the last 20 years, and it's no one's fault. It's just the momentum slows down, and now the momentum needs to pick up, and there needs to be everyone coming together, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing the sports come together. We're seeing organizations come together and say, okay, let's build the momentum. Let's get the programming in place. Let's build on all the programming that's out there and create a platform. So I really think that that's where we lose that momentum. So.
Can I just build on that too?
Please.
I think one of the challenges, I can speak firsthand for basketball, and I know in the talks over the last week with the other NSOs, it's something else that's coming up, and I think there is a challenge around the disconnect between the funding and the direction for the NSO from the federal government and the funding and the direction from the PTSO from the provincial governments. And I think it's really important that all get involved, but the alignment between the bodies is fundamental to execution.
So what do you mean? Like the NSO is focused on like developing elite athletes and putting athletes on the podium, and the provincial organizations are much smaller. I mean, you say like a provincial sport organization. Some are very big, but some are a couple of some are a few volunteers in an office. Like their ability to exact change at the local level is quite limited.
Right, and so with the NSO, for sure, we look at Olympic level athletes and looking at the development pathway, but our other sort of half of the office kind of works on development, the actual grassroots developments, and provides a lot of these resources for those PTSOs. So if they only have one or two, or it's run by volunteers, that the NSO can really drive those resources and be the ones to create those things for them to allow for the ease of implementation. But if what they have to do for their provincial government is different than trying to get those resources out, or what the goals are around safety and sport from the NSO, then they have no accountability to the NSO to make sure that that actually gets done. And there's nothing that the NSO can do to make sure that it gets done in that province, because it's not tied to federal funding. So that's where I think working all together, like it's really great that the provincial associations and the provincial governments have ideas around safety of sport. I think it's really great that the federal government does too, but if it doesn't get aligned, the implementation, there's going to be some hurdles in it.
Sounds like a mess.
Well, welcome to Canada and Confederation, but I think, Jamie, what has happened this past week is going to change the landscape. My hope is there's a pre this week in Canadian sport, and there's a post change that happens for safety. And so I know our federal minister for sport and science, Minister Duncan, is meeting with her provincial territorial ministers this Friday at the Canada Winter Games. Safety is the topic. We're hosting safe sports summits across the country. We need the village, and we need to come together to try to find a harmonized code, a basic code of conduct that exists and lives in all of our clubs across the country. And we do need our provinces and territories to come to the table with us and make this a reality. And I believe the momentum of this week has given us the best opportunity to achieve that if I've ever seen it.
I agree.
Ken, do you feel that this issue is taken seriously?
I do, and I think it's
because
great.
you're not a sport.
I'm not a sport person, but in 35 years I've seen all kinds of situations come across our door in terms of child abuse. This happens with piano teachers and tutors and camp counselors and school teachers and in families. It's a broad issue. And I think, well, it's great that this focus is happening with sport, and it's great that the minister is looking at it. We don't have a national child abuse prevention strategy in this country. Unless we can fundamentally change the way we look at the protection of children, this is just going to keep going on. We may get better at recognizing it, we may get better at stopping it, but we're not necessarily going to get better at preventing it.
Mark, in our numbers that we put together, a vast majority of those that convicted were male coaches. And Mark McPherson asking on Facebook, and maybe taking it a little too far. Maybe this is the best idea is to have not as many male coaches. I'll just edit that out a little bit there, but I mean, how do you, that's a tradition in sports. There's just more men that are involved in coaching. How do we broaden it out? How do we, get more females involved, not just coaching, girls teams and women's teams, but crossing over, into male sports too? I'll start with you, Don.
Yeah, I think basketball itself is starting to break barriers, and not just within the grassroots situation, but establishing role models, and Becky Hammond, and some of the professionals that are taking that on. The Raptors have been unbelievable with employing and putting females in, as development coaches and etc. So I think in basketball we're starting to get some role models in that space, and I think it's up to all of us to create those role models. I know for us in our high performance streams, we're completely committed to having women coaching on the high performance side, and are sort of one of the few countries around the world that consistently develop and send women to represent our teams on the world stage. And within a lot of our national programming, we have rules around having females involved in the coaching sphere. So I do think that is something we're looking at, and I think as sport and women in sport develop, we're going to see more and more of that, and all the women that are already in it, and being those role models for others. I think one of the biggest things that we've really started to look at is the recruitment of female coaches versus the recruitment of male coaches. And traditionally, we recruit male coaches once they're done playing. Someone finishes and say, hey, what are you thinking about doing? You should come coach. But the difference is women tend to plan significantly more in advance. And so if you were to ask a female that same question once they were done playing, she's already planned the next 3 or 4 years of her life. And so planning that ahead of time, and so asking those athletes, at 14, 15, 16 years old, exposing them to coaching education, coaching opportunities, and really changing the way we recruit women in coaching, as opposed to just applying what we've been doing with the males onto a female of different gender.
Todd, what are you guys doing?
I think recruitment in general is one that we need to continue to work on. We've got some great points that are taught and given to the minor hockey associations, things like mentorship programs, good training for coaches. And I really stress that it's got to be a good environment. It's got to be a good environment to attract people. Moms are getting more involved, so take advantage of that as well. So through mentorship, through good training, through sitting down with coaches and letting them know what the expectations are when they're involved, creating a great environment for them to coach in. That's all giving opportunity, and that's going to build that.
Want to bring in another question from our audience here. When you look, back down to that local level, Laura McDonald on Facebook saying, why not have an advocate on each and every association's board? The same way, you have someone in charge of the money, because still at that local level for that, and it shouldn't be the responsibility of the child to flag the abuse, but within that local level, would that be something that you think might be effective I'll start with you down at the end there.
I think it's a great idea. I don't think the child should ever be responsible for their own protection. It's up to adults to do that. So having somebody who is paying attention, recognizing any concerns, somebody the child can talk to, I think it's a great idea.
I want to remind everyone that this is streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and you can keep sending your questions in as you so wish. On the hockey side, you guys have been effective at exacting change in certain areas. You know, around concussions, there's an awareness around that. You know, if your child was going to step on the ice, you have to take the respect in sport course. You guys said everyone's playing half-ice hockey now, and then everyone started playing half-ice hockey. If you wanted to make a difference in this issue, you could, couldn't you?
I think we are making a difference. I look at back in the 90s to now, and I truly believe that Speak Out through our great volunteers and our members and the people who have helped to deliver that have made it part of our everyday business. You talk to any coach, you talk to any association, and you mentioned Speak Out or you mentioned Respect in Sport, they know what it is. And they know they have to do it. It's become an expected part of everyday business. So we have made change. Do we need to learn? Absolutely. We need to learn and build. We're not perfect, but I think that over the last 20 years, we truly have made it part of our culture. With respect to the education and the need for policies and all the stuff that we talked about color-wise earlier. So I think that change is there, but we need to continue to grow it. So,
do you think this could become think of the issue of concussions and how it's become, you know, it's like a known thing now. How do you get this issue to there, Lorraine?
Well, you're bang on when you say we got concussions from a place where it was considered a hallmark to get your bell rung to now everybody understanding it's unacceptable and the long-term damage is critical to remove. But so what really, we look at the concussion model of how the federal, provincial, territorial partners came together with sport to say, okay, concussion, we've got to get a harmonized protocol across the country, and it needs to go through our sport system, and it needs to be a requirement of our sport system. So the key is our federal, provincial, territorial sport ministers uniting around this topic in the same way that they did with concussion, and I know they will.
Want to add anything to that at the end, Karyn?
Yeah, I think Lorraine is right. I agree with her. And I think what's changed is, in the past, people had difficulty believing when child sexual abuse was reported. I think now there's a much greater understanding of the amount that it happens as well as the impact. And I think that's similar to what's happened with concussions as well. So people understand now to a much greater degree that this is serious and has to be taken seriously.
Dave Stevenson on Facebook kind of asking about whether this is increased or not increased. But in terms of, you know, an increase in the discussion, Don, when you talk to parents, you know, people ask you about shoes. They ask you about, you know, you playing a zone man-to-man. What are you doing? How is this issue coming out of the shadows a little bit? Are people talking about it or still no?
No, I think it's something that's going to become that way. I think we're still just at the preliminary realm of it, and I think, you know, those that have been exposed to it or have previous knowledge or come from an industry that has more awareness around it, I think they're more aware and ask those questions. But I think it's something that's just going to become more and more prevalent. And I think, you know, it's always been in the coaching excellence piece, and, you know, to have these background checks and this and that. But I think there's going to be more value added to those things. Like there's, you know, it's not just a hurdle that you're jumping through. We're doing it to try and get to an end goal. We're doing it to try and make sure that all these youth are in a safe environment. So, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to be talked about more, but I think the value to it is going to be clearly understood by those involved.
What about you, Todd? I mean, you look at all these things, you know, in Canada, we know that hockey culture so well, and we always see, hockey evolving slowly in certain areas. We saw a lot of stuff with bullying and hazing. Still, you thought that was a resolved topic. Is there, in the hockey community, do you think there's a willingness to talk about this, or is it still something that...
Absolutely, and and I go back to the 90s, and obviously that's when we started to talk about it, and it was a tough conversation, but I think today that there is perfect willingness to talk about it. We constantly have communication with our members. Our members are fantastic. We have, and they have communication with their minor hockey associations, and I can tell you that this topic is on the agenda for a lot of meetings, and has been even prior to this discussion. And respect in sport is constantly talked about, and policies are constantly written, and so I think it is talked about, and I think it will continue to be talked about.
Dave Bradley on Facebook asking, are people compelled to report, something even if it doesn't rise to the level of abuse? And a lot of this is about prevention. I mean, the abuse is rarely, if ever, seen. It's all these things, before. Lorraine, can you talk a little bit about gray area behavior? And that's really where a lot of this starts, and I think that's what what this viewer is getting at.
Yeah, so I think sport has to be about the needs of the child, not the needs of the coach. And so the gray starts happening. The easy way for me to explain this is, you can have a child by the pool deck and they've started to cry because something has happened, and the coach gives that child a consoling hug. That's okay, but when the coach comes into the club's house and says, I've had a bad day, I need a hug, that's a gray area right there. That's the easy way of describing where gray starts happening. And grooming happens over time. And so we have training on grooming with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection that's available for anybody that can talk about how the grooming process works, because it's not an overnight instance typically. It's a slow, methodical, insidious approach to gaining a child's trust and then abusing them. And it's not just about gaining the child's trust, it's about gaining the parents' trust around that child, any gatekeeper. And so the gray zone is really about saying, what's the job description, what should be expected, regardless if you're a volunteer or paid, and you don't step out of those boundaries. Weekend movies are not okay with the coach and a participant.
And Karyn, I'm gonna come to you in a second. If you're just joining us now, we're an esteemed panel joining us. Beside me, Todd Jackson from Hockey Canada, Don Smyth from Canada Basketball, Lorraine Lafreniere, who is the head of the Coaching Association of Canada, and Karyn Kennedy from Boost Child and Youth Advocacy Centre. We've brought together this panel to take your questions, Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, about the series we've done this week looking at the incidents of sexual abuse in amateur sport. 222 coaches convicted over the last 20 years. And we're just talking about gray areas there. Karyn, I'm sure you've seen a lot of gray area activity. What are some things that should raise a red flag for parents?
Yeah, I think exactly what Lorraine is talking about are the kinds of things. Why would an adult want to spend time with a child alone? That doesn't make sense. So I think making sure that whether it's the officials or whether it's the parents paying attention to any kind of unusual interest in that child. The other thing too that parents unfortunately need to be paying attention to as well is the online communication that their children are having, because this is an area that we've certainly seen a huge increase over the last number of years. People reaching out to children, can be coaches, can be anybody reaching out to children online. So I think the red flags are there, and every time you hear about one of these stories, people will say, yeah, I wondered about that, or I thought that was strange, or why was he spending so much time with that child?
That ever happened to you, Dawn?
No, I mean, we have unfortunately dealt with that, but I think what's really important about the gray zone is, again, going back to what Karyn said at the beginning about trusting your gut, like adults trusting your gut. And the thing about a gray zone is the more that they're documented, the more a gray zone starts becoming red. And it starts turning from gray to red. And so, if I hold on to my gray zone activity about the youth and then Lorraine holds on to it, then it just ends up being my gray zone and not sure about that activity. But when both of us report it and there starts being a documentation about something, then when it gets to Todd at the administrative level, there's a couple of incidences that are gray and it will allow Todd to act on it. So again, I think it goes back to what I was saying before, just don't hold on to it. Get into action. Things need to be reported. What Karyn was saying, trust your gut, I'll go back to that, and start to put those things forward so that they really can be dealt with and not just thought about.
And Jamie, if I could just add to what Dawn's saying, our child protection agencies are great resources. You don't have to be certain that something is happening to make a call. They can provide advice. And just as you were saying, you may have concerns, Lorraine may have concerns. That coach could have moved from Alberta to Ontario, and there could be concerns that have been reported in the past. So the child protection agencies have that kind of information. So I would always say, if you have any doubt, make that call and ask for some help.
What are your guys' thoughts on a public list? I mean, of people that shouldn't be coaching?
For us, I think we need to investigate it further. There are lots of new ideas coming out. That's one of them. We need to sit down and really look at it, investigate it, see how it would work before we were to look at it. But again, there's so many new ideas now coming out based on the discussions that have been had. That all that will be looked at as we move ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility, but I just don't have the expertise and legalities around it. And I think there's some legal pieces around someone suspended versus a list of, and what happens if it's an allegation. Do they go on, or is it only after a charge? I think the government is the best to really dictate and be the authority on that piece. I think as non-profit sporting organizations, I'm not sure if we have the legal expertise to dictate, the legalities around those sort of allegations and, criminal charges and so forth. However, I do say as we move in licensing, not just around safety, I think there's other reasons why, this particular safety in sport, there's other safety in sport issues around potentially suspending a coach and a license, or an official and a license, or, a volunteer, etc. And I think that's where we're going with the licensing system and, being able to make sure that we are tracking that as an NSO. And I think, Karyn brought in a really good point when someone moves from one, province to another. And I think we've seen that historically with some of these cases that's occurred. And I think that's a very, very important. And again, going back to what I was saying before, how those PTSOs need to be aligned with the NSOs so that we can help with that. And we really be the gathering of that information so that when they do move or they come up in another area, that we have all that information.
That's a gray area. I mean, someone's in a province, there's a lot of complaints about them. They're never charged criminally. They go to another province, you do a background check.
Yeah.
Nothing shows up. A lot of this is about being vigilant. Like, we've heard so much about this, and Carla Zwicker on Facebook says, question for panelists, did you do sports in your childhood? How many parents stood by to watch over their children each and every day? Today, are there as many vigilant parents there to supervise what the coaches do with their children? Todd?
It's a tough question. I did do sport when I was young. I don't know that I ever noticed how many parents were actually there, but I think that parents are getting more involved. But it goes back to our earlier discussion that if I'm a parent and I have a young person involved or in sport, get involved. And it can be as small as carrying the sweaters or helping with the water bottles, or maybe something away from the rink, away from the dressing room, to know what your child is doing. Talk to your kids, open conversation. So what did you do at practice tonight? What are you doing tomorrow? Let's see your schedule. That's all getting involved because time is limited for a lot of parents. And so there are lots of small ways to be involved, but definitely be involved with your child. Ask the questions, know what they're doing, know what the team is doing. If they're going on that tournament, know where they're going, who's supervising, all those little things that really do make a difference.
Question for you, Lorraine, from Kimberly Dennis on Facebook. What happens when a coach moves from one sport to another? We alluded to it a little bit before, but one province to another, one sport to another. Whenever you mention this, people think, oh, it's like the priest model. But I mean, what mitigates that? Is there anything to catch that person?
So I do think I will come back to it till I'm blue in the face. The rule of two, making sure that no adult is ever alone with a child is the most important thing, and that has changed from when we were younger and when I played sport. Coaches are influential, can be great people, but we cannot set our system up to have blind trust in any function or any individual. And so the only way to get around that, because right now there is no registry, there's no registry as you talked about across the country for any domain, is to make sure that there are multiple adults present. It's taking the focus off the field of play and thinking about the clubhouse and the social environments and the travel and the accommodation. That's really where we need to put our focus and our attention, because that's where the risk happens.
A question for you guys. On that note, you look at basketball and hockey in this country, in a city like this, which I live in and know well. It's so competitive. You work so hard to get your child a spot on that team. You see a little bit of gray zone behavior. Maybe you're the last. You don't want to be the parent that rocks the boat. It can be hard as a parent sometimes to insert yourself into that when you've done so much to put your child on this team.
Yeah. I think just backing up before even getting there is making sure that that coach has been educated, that there has been background checks done, like all the preliminary parts getting into it. And I think also building on what Todd was saying about the parents getting involved, I think it's important. As a parent, you can get involved around the safety. So it's like going and asking those questions that Karyn talked about with the athlete, and not just once, but multiple times throughout the season, checking back in with them. I think those parts are really important. Not necessarily being really concerned on how the shot is being taught or what kind of zone offense you were told to play, or those are sort of the coach issues. It's the safety issues that I think is really important for parent involvement, and those are the ones that you're more than entitled to be involved with. And it's starting to put yourself, if there is a gray zone, starting to put yourself into those places and, intervene in that sense, document it, keep a bit of diaries, check with some other people to see what else is going on and how they're feeling about it. I think all those things is, again, getting into action instead of keeping it internal and fully understanding the competitive aspect of it. But honestly, between hockey and basketball, there are so many teams you can be playing for, and as a parent, you get a choice. As to where you put your youth or your child and to which program they're involved with. So just make sure it's a good one.
And Karyn, I'm sure you've had parents come to you before, much like Kelly on Facebook here, and be like, I wanted to say something, but I didn't feel like I could.
Yeah, so it goes back to trusting your instincts, trusting that if you have a concern, there's probably a reason for it. And I think also really thinking about what is in your child's best interest. Is the need to succeed and really be a tremendous athlete, is that really what the child wants, or is that what the parent wants? And I think those are hard questions that parents have to face, but you really need to bring it back to what is best for this child.
And it doesn't have to be a sacrifice of one or the other. You can't you don't have to sacrifice safety in order to be good or competitive.
Yes.
So it's not a sacrificing situation. It's not a one or the other. You can actually have both.
And if you're just joining us now, this is a Facebook Live. We're talking about the series that we've been working on and presenting all week, looking at sexual abuse in amateur sport. The response has been absolutely overwhelming, and that's why we've brought together this great panel to help answer some of your questions. Todd Jackson from Hockey Canada, Don Smyth from Canada Basketball, Lorraine Lafreniere with the Coaching Association of Canada, Karyn Kennedy with Boost Child and Youth Advocacy. Really thank you guys for coming in and giving us a little bit of your time. We're going to get to a few more questions here. Erin Kelly on Facebook basically saying that she has an issue with a coach, and she's taken it to her provincial body, and she feels like she doesn't getting any traction. Lorraine, if parents feel that they're not being heard, what should they do? I mean, obviously, if a criminal offense has been committed, or they believe that, they should go to police. But if they feel that they're not being heard within their organization on something that maybe is not criminal, what should they do?
Well, I think Dawn's point earlier about moving it up the chain. So if it's a local club and it's a member of the provincial sport organization, you go to the provincial sport organization. And if the provincial or sport organization isn't listening, the national sport organization is listening or should be listening. And if that's not happening, then you do go out to the government agency that funds sport. There are so many avenues of recourse to have that conversation. There's the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, there's your Children's Aid, there's your police. Depending on the level of severity, no one will ever be blamed for reaching out and expressing a concern. So that we need to reassure people, it's not about having that burden of proof, it's about having a concern and dealing with that concern. That's the biggest prevention that a parent can take.
As we kind of digest all this information, I mean, you guys have, it's kind of clear to me in going through all of this, there's a lot of good things going on in this country, a lot of good programs, but it's even listening to you guys talk, it can be confusing to people. You know, going forward, what's the one thing, Todd, that we need to do to get to a better place on this quickly?
You know, I think what we're doing is and what we're seeing now is collaboration. And I think that collaboration is going to bring some consistency, and that will be huge. And it's a case of creating a consistent framework and allowing the sports then take that framework and have some flexibility to build it around their sport. And that's going to give consistency. It's going to help to give consistency to what we're doing across the country.
Is this something that Hockey Canada is going to, an issue you guys are going to seize? Is this something that you guys are going to be putting energy into?
Well, we're certainly working with the group to help and with that collaboration, and we will continue to do that because we feel that we have something to give from a resource standpoint, and hopefully we, as I say, we come out with that consistent message at the end of the day.
What do we need to do to change this quickly?
I think everyone's echoed on how we need everyone working together, and I think the alignment piece is going to be the most bang for our buck, and as opposed to all these individuals doing all this work, if we align, we can bring all of the power and energy and work into one stream to get some sort of action going on. So to me, it's alignment between what those local clubs need, what the PTSO is mandated and can implement into those local clubs, and how the NSO can support that and make it consistent across the country. To me, I think that's going to be our most powerful way to be able to deal with this and make sure that sport is safe.
Partnership with child serving agencies is critical. A harmonized code is critical, and the only message I can leave everyone with is safety is not an endpoint, it's a journey, it's never over.
Ken, you're coming from kind of outside again on this, and we really appreciate your perspective and all this. Look from the outside looking in. Do you think that sport's on the right track in this country to deal with this issue, or does it sound like it's kind of confusing to you?
Yeah, no, well, parts of it are confusing, absolutely. But I do agree with what my panelists have said, that collaboration, partnership, I think a willingness to be open and talk about this issue, those are all key.
Well, I want to thank everyone for watching. An hour has gone by quickly, and really want to thank everyone for sending their questions in. A couple of reminders to people out there: if you're a child and you have a question about anything happening to you, or you want to just talk to someone, you can get in touch with Kids Help Phone. There's also resources out there for adults who may have dealt with something in their past. Todd Jackson, Dawn Smyth, Lorraine Lafreniere, Karyn, I really appreciate you making some time for us, all of you coming down here. It's a nice way to add to the conversation after what's been a busy week, and hopefully a week that'll exact some change in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.